Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I'm Ross McCorkle. Above me on the screen, Joe Clark, and we are less than a week away until Pittsburgh Steelers training camp is underway. Things are going to look a whole lot different. Mike McCarthy's first year, obviously no more Mike Tomlin. We've all been used to things kind of operating a certain way for so many years. It's all just kind of felt monotonous or repetitive. This year, it's really going to be a learning process for just about everybody. I've heard several members of the media talking about that. We'll dive into some of that and preview training camp at the top of the show. We'll talk about which positions might need some help. And then we'll transition into a slightly off topic, but some interesting rankings that have come out from ESPN and Mike Renner from CBS Sports talking about kind of the youth of the team, and so what the future of the team might look like. We'll talk about some of that as well. Joe, how's everything going? Are you looking forward to camp, and are you doing anything? I guess you're on rotation this weekend, but are you doing anything fun with your last day of freedom before the onslaught?
Yeah, no, nothing crazy. Just gonna kind of rest up and get ready for what's going to be a very busy time.
Yes, I told everybody who I know, like, this is the last weekend where if you want to do something, I'm available. So I think I'm trying to balance between like seeing people this weekend and also just doing nothing. I'm finding it hard to balance that, but we'll get into the show. Like I said, the camp really is going to be quite a bit different. I think just listening to the media folk who are going to be there interviewing players and Mike McCarthy and covering practice every day in person, they don't even know what to expect. I mean, they're showing up on Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. to interview players, and it's not going to operate like it used to on report day where players would just kind of trickle in, and then once they got their, refrigerators and TVs and Xboxes and stuff into the dorm, they'd come back out and do some quick interviews. And there were, maybe 10 different players would talk or more some years. Of course, Antonio Brown helicopter incident, the dumpster truck, all the different kind of theatrics that came with report day, we're not going to see because it sounds like a lot of the players are going to report Monday night. And so by the time they're talking to the media, it'll just be at a podium session. There's no kind of just random interviews here and there. So right from the start, we'll see how different it is. Joe, what about camp and I guess just kind of zooming out, what about camp are you most looking forward to seeing in terms of the changes from Tomlin to McCarthy?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest change supposedly is that it's probably going to be less physical, which, as a viewer's perspective, is a little less fun to watch. But I'm just kind of intrigued to see how things are different, really, like how the development process changes in terms of, what drills are they going to run? Is there going to be, as many competition periods? Just how it's all going to work. So I'm kind of just intrigued to see what is different. I mean, obviously, we hear so much about McCarthy as a quarterback developer, how that's going to play out. And, I think the quarterback battles is obviously incredibly intriguing between Will Howard and Mason Rudolph and how that plays out. So just seeing how McCarthy kind of operates with all of that. And I'm kind of excited for, a little bit of a different experience just to see what it all will entail.
Yeah, practice is starting earlier in the morning, so
Thank God.
right. Most everything will be done by the early afternoon in terms of interviews and stuff being completed. Of course, stuff will trickle in throughout the day as some of the, Steelers.com get around to posting the actual videos of the interviews. And there might be some interviews that don't get videotaped that happen on, little sidebars from various outlets and stuff. So there'll still be stuff trickling in throughout the day after practice each day there. But yeah, it's going to look a lot different. And I mean, as far as McCarthy, you talked about his developing of the quarterbacks. We saw it in the OTAs in the spring. He was pretty much only with the quarterbacks for several of the practices. I think I forget what it was. Maybe some of the early OTAs. The report was he literally was with the quarterbacks the entire time. He was had a singular focus. Obviously, he can't do that entirely at training camp, but does it start that way? Does he kind of lay the foundation with the quarterbacks and build from there and go focus on other positions? There's a slightly bigger coaching staff this year, so does he just trust his guys to do their thing at each position? And is he really just going to be a quarterback guy? It's going to be interesting to see for sure. Are they going to have backs on backers? Are they going to have 7 shots? Both of the kind of the two drills that defined Mike Tomlin's practices and training camps neither of them might be around anymore. And so I think it was Mark Cabali who said it's hard to find anything that's the same. So basically everything has changed. Right down to I saw on the sheet they have some of the practices ending at like I think it's like 116 or something. Like that's how precise things are on the how they have it laid out. Probably a Scarnecchia thing, the chief of staff who helps organize stuff, but very interesting. I think we saw in the OTAs that they maximize every single minute down to coaches not being allowed on the field during warmups and whatnot, and it sounds like that's going to continue in camp. Joe, obviously the main kind of attraction at training camp, other than Mike McCarthy and just the newness of it all, is the quarterback battle. Do you buy this whole narrative that's formed that it's basically Rudolph versus Howard? I guess just from there.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's the way it will play out. I said this with Dave and Alex the other day. So I have such a hard time reckoning with all the praise that Will Howard got that he's not going to end up on this roster. But at the same time, you have to see it. I mean, this Mike McCarthy, Omar Khan, everybody went out of their way to say how much, they really like Will Howard and think he can, be a really good player, starter in this league. But we haven't seen him actually take any snaps. So I think it's fair to label it a true competition because if Howard goes out there in the preseason and really struggles, then is that a guy you're going to trust as your backup quarterback? I don't think so. So I think he has to show not, I don't think it's being made out that he has to, have a pristine camp and a pristine preseason to make the roster. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I do think he has to show that he is capable of, being a guy that if in a pinch can come in, make a few throws, just be at least an NFL level backup quarterback. So I do think that is a battle, but I just have such a hard time. And unless Will Howard really, really struggles, I have a hard time seeing him not making the roster.
Yeah, and the one that I can't get past is Mike McCarthy. I think it was in the middle of OTAs or during minicamp on one of the XM radio shows, Sirius XM. He said, quote, Will Howard will, quote, definitely be a starter in this league. That's strong language. And if you believe a guy can be a starter in the NFL, I mean, he didn't say he can definitely have a long career as a backup. He said, definitely be a starter in this league is the words he chose to use. I don't know how liberal he just throws such phrases around, but that is a pretty strong phrase that he used, no matter which way you cut it. And so you can't cut a guy, try to stash him on the practice squad or whatever, who you think that about. If you actually think that about him, it would be irresponsible to let him go. Now, the other side of the argument is it would be irresponsible to not have a single start backing up a soon-to-be 43-year-old quarterback. I get that. And I think it was Mark Cabali who this week said Mason Rudolph is a stone-cold lock, about as strong of language as you could possibly use. A stone-cold lock to make the roster. He didn't necessarily say a stone-cold lock to be the top backup, though he kind of did. The strongest language was to make the roster. And so that means one of two things for Will Howard, if you buy Cabali's take there. It's A, either the Steelers keep 4 quarterbacks. That's his one way to make the team. Or B, somebody gets hurt. Basically, those are the only two scenarios in which Cabali's certainty makes sense there. And so, yeah, I do have a hard time kind of buying that. And I will say Cabali's really the only one saying that right now. So a lot of the other beat writers and stuff are kind of either more neutral or even leaning towards Howard, to be honest. So I guess we'll see. He's certainly he's the only one saying things in as confident of terms, so we will definitely see on that. What other battles, other than quarterback? Obviously, there's going to be a lot of words wasted or spent on the quarterback position throughout the training camp. What other positions are you excited to get a look at?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really curious what's going to happen at running back because you have Caleb Johnson, who you took in the third round last year, did nothing for you as a rookie. And you have Eli Heidenreich, who you took this year in the seventh round, but Mike McCarthy said he'd open up the playbook for. Heidenreich might have more upside on special teams. We'll see how things look during training camp, but I'm just intrigued how that's going to play out. It was a little interesting that ESPN Brooke Pryor's roster prediction had Seals only keeping three running backs, and the third was Travis Homer, who has 7 carries since the start of the 2023 season. I do not see a way that that is the case because if one of Jalen Warren and Rico Dowdle go down, are you really going to trust Travis Homer to come in with a guy who's barely ran the football? I mean, he only has 90 career carries in 7 seasons in the league. He's never averaged more than what, I don't like 3.5 yards per carry, something like that. Just hasn't necessarily been a like in just given. I guess he's had a few seasons where he's been productive as a receiver, but as a running back, he just hasn't been um a reliable option. So I think you're going to need to keep one of Johnson or Heidenreich as the third back. So I'm kind of intrigued what will happen there.
Yeah, we've talked a bit about that whole conundrum. It seems like the Caleb Johnson not making the roster train is gaining steam. I think my first roster prediction, I left Johnson off, and I think what ESPN's Brooke Pryor just left him off. I think there's been at least one more beat writer that's left him off at some point in their predictions, and so yeah, Johnson's entering a pivotal year. We talked, I think, just last week about him training with Montgomery and training in Phoenix again. Probably going to come into camp in very good shape. He's doing all the right things right now, but at the end of the day, I don't know. Is there anything that Johnson can do to jump either Dowd or Warren on the depth chart?
One of Dowdle or Warren can get hurt. I think that's really the only way that Johnson sees himself rise there. I mean, the two of them are both established. Dowdle's coming off back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, and he has a familiarity with the coaching staff. Warren's just been rock solid. He's a solid pass blocker, and I do think if Caleb Johnson can meaningfully improve his pass blocking and his receiving, then even without the special teams value, I think then that gives him a really solid chance because those are two, pretty big issues for him. And keeping a third running back who isn't going to be an asset in special teams isn't going to help you out as a blocker. It isn't going to help you out as a receiver of the backfield. It's just tough to justify. So meaningfully improving those two things, I think, can at least put him closer and put him in a good spot. But I just don't think there's any path for him to pass those two right now.
Yeah, and if all you're looking for is somebody who can kind of meaningfully improve in the receiving area and third down duties, I mean, that would lend itself to Heidenreich, I would think, if you're going that route. I mean, to me, we've just kind of established, all right, the only way that Johnson's jumping one of those two on the depth chart is if an injury takes place before the season.
Yeah.
So if no injury occurs, you have him as a third back. Where does that leave you? And we've talked about this. There's not really any special teams value. Can he learn special teams? I think our listener question today is about that very topic, so we'll save that conversation for that. But yeah, I mean the lack of special teams value, and just the fact that Heidenreich can offer kind of the versatility. They've talked about position flex. This new coaching staff has talked about that ad nauseum, and Heidenreich is kind of the definition of that, while Johnson is the opposite or the antithesis of that. So you just really start to struggle to see how he makes the roster. And I get, Omar Khan probably doesn't want to move on from a guy who he spent his second draft pick on last year in the 2025 draft. But man, if you had to put a percent on it right now, that he makes the roster. Actually, let's go the other way. A percent that he gets cut on cut down day. What would be your confidence level there?
It was really interesting because I think going in right now, I would have, I think, for the percent chance he makes the roster, I'd say 40, 45%. But then I also don't know if I would say there's a 60% chance he gets cut. I mean, it honestly might be a true 50-50 coin flip. That's kind of a cop-out answer, but I mean, it really is going to depend. It's tough to say without seeing him in training camp. I think it genuinely is probably a true 50-50 right now.
Yeah, and last year, I mean, he looked good at the beginning of camp. The first week of camp, we were talking about Caleb Johnson a ton. Actually, I just recently did a rookie kind of predictions for the site for the 2026 class, and I looked back at my 2025 predictions, and man, was I high on Caleb Johnson coming in and, enabling Arthur Smith's offense to do things. That was the talk this time last year that could be the case. And man, people were spending like, for the fantasy football folks out there, people were spending like absurdly high picks on Caleb Johnson. Like the hype was there, even in training camp. And so probably by week 2 or 3, it started to become evident that he wasn't going to be a top guy and that, Gainwell was kind of the second back. And this year, there's really less debate about that with adding Dowdle. Dowdle's a much more accomplished back than Gainwell was this time last year. So, yeah, I think if I had to put a percent on it, honestly, right now, I would say 2/3 he's gone in my mind. I just really struggle to see him. Maybe that's a bit strong, but that's where my thinking's at right now. My position that I want to watch is wide receiver 3. Looks like we're both kind of focused on the offense, which makes sense. There's a lot more kind of interesting things going on the offense, but wide receiver 3, Jeremy Bernard, Roman Wilson. Sounds like Wilson's going to get all the snaps right away in training camp as the wide receiver 3. It's his job to lose for the time being, but obviously Pittsburgh traded up to get Bernard in the second round. You don't do that unless you think the guy can help you now. You look at the receivers that went after Bernard, there was kind of a big lull in the receiver market, so maybe Pittsburgh felt like, man, this is kind of the last receiver worth getting here, but it was a receiver-heavy class, and there were plenty of guys that went after him that I think could carve out some nice careers. So in my mind, that means they're expecting Bernard to contribute sooner rather than later. All the talk is that he's the most NFL ready of the bunch this year, perhaps of the entire draft class. He does everything well. Aaron Rodgers already said some nice things about him. He's kind of already been learning from Rodgers throughout OTAs and stuff. Everything seems to point towards Bernard getting work there, but how long can Roman Wilson hold him off?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it really depends on what Roman Wilson can show with his chemistry with Aaron Rodgers. If it's meaningfully improved, like we supposedly heard it was earlier this offseason. I think Mike DeFabo said back in early June during OTAs that there was clear that there was a difference in the connection between Roman Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, and if the two of them are connecting early and often, then there's going to be no rush for the Steelers to really move off Roman Wilson. And I think then for at least, a good bit, he can maybe hold off Bernard. But on the flip side, we've also heard that Bernard's like the antithesis of the Aaron Rodgers doesn't get along with rookies, and he's a guy that Rodgers loves. So, I mean, we'll see. I think there has to just be like a very clear improvement in the chemistry between Wilson and Rodgers, and the two of them, being on the same page, which they were not at all last season.
Yeah, which force is greater, Rodgers' history with rookies or Rodgers' last year history with Roman Wilson? That's what we're going to find out. And I honestly am not sure. I think this really could go either way in my mind. This is more of a 50-50 of who's going to come out of camp with the wide receiver 3. Maybe I'd go 51% for Roman Wilson just because, you'd kind of hope that by year 3 and year 2 of working with Rodgers and, maybe he's worked out some of the kinks. And man, I've always been high on Roman Wilson. It's getting harder to kind of maintain that thought, but this time last year, once again, Roman Wilson was the buzz of OTAs, the buzz of training camp. There was, I think we've talked about it, but there was like unreal levels of hype coming from the beat writer circle. I think Mark Caboli talked to some kind of team source, and he said that there was more buzz about Roman Wilson than anyone he's ever heard buzz about. And it was like, oh my gosh, this guy's about to save the Steelers wide receiver position. And then, of course, he spent most of the end of the year as a healthy scratch. So it's kind of you need to see it to believe it thing with Roman Wilson, unfortunately. But I am still open to it. He still has that speed. He's probably even improved his 40 time since the combine. His 40 time was quite good. I think him and, was it the Kuntz podcast or one of the podcasts he was on there, and they kind of talked about the fastest guys on the team. Roman Wilson's probably one of them. Maybe you throw Dalen Everett and Deshaun Jameson and I don't know, like those kind of guys in the mix, but Roman Wilson has the speed, and Pittsburgh's offense could probably use that. So I don't know. Is there a world where both of them kind of split 50-50, the wide receiver three responsibilities, or do you see it kind of by the end of the season working out one way or the other?
I think it's very reasonable to expect that they can split them a little bit. I mean, again, we're not in an Arthur Smith offense where the third receiver is basically not even a part of the offense at all. Like Mike McCarthy will use multiple guys, so I think it's very realistic to expect them to split. And I mean, I think you would say it would be a successful year if both of them walk out of the season with pretty similar production, because that would mean you're getting a full you're getting a good season if both Roman Wilson and Jeremy Bernard are, it obviously would have to be, I'm not saying if they both have 10 catches, that's a good season, but, if both these guys walk away with 30 catches and you're getting, 60 receptions basically that out of your wide receiver three, I think, that would be a pretty successful season.
Yeah, I think it was last year, Mike, or not last year, 2 years ago, his final year with the Cowboys. Mike McCarthy used three receivers close to 70% of the time, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, and I think that's almost double what Arthur Smith was doing last year as one of the lowest rates in the league of 11 personnel. So yeah, I think there is a world where you kind of have wide receiver threes. You get Roman on the field for certain situations, and you get Bernard on the field for certain situations. But if you had to predict right now, who's the week one, snap one, 11 personnel, third guy?
I'm gonna go with Roman Wilson. I think my opinion on that's probably changed a lot over the last 2 3 months, but something's telling me that Roman Wilson's gonna stick here, and I thought for sure that he would be a cut candidate, um, and I still think he still could be. He could still very much struggle in training camp and find his way off this roster, but I think there's something in him that's gonna improve, and he's going to be the guy this season that I think maybe not that we thought he would be, but I think he's going to be a guy that is reliable and see some playing time. I think he knows, I think, as well as anybody, that it's a make or break year, and something's got to click. And if it doesn't click, then he'll be off the roster. So I think he's going to put together a pretty strong camp and probably be the week one guy.
Yeah, I'll lean the same way for now. One other quick note on training camp, and it's kind of the Pittsburgh sacred tradition. So it's if anyone were to suggest that Pittsburgh should stop training camp at St. Vincent College in Latrobe, they'd probably be called all kinds of things. Chiefly, you're not a real Steelers fan if you don't think they should, that kind of thing. Well, Bud Dupree and Cam Hayward kind of opened up on what they really think about camp, and it was kind of interesting. Do I have that pulled up here? I don't. But basically, Bud Dupree was like, I hated it. I hate living in the dorms. Basically saying he doesn't miss going to camp in Latrobe. And then he shifted to, man, the best camp we had was the camps when we were at home during COVID. And Cam Hayward was told basically a funny story where he's like, I was going to Art Rooney and saying I was hoping that we'd win the Super Bowl that year so that I could tell Art Rooney, hey, look, we won the Super Bowl when we had camp at home. So I think maybe we should change up how things are done. I think it was kind of lighthearted and maybe slightly, I don't want to say they were joking. I think their dislike for camp was genuine, at least the conditions of like living. I mean, you got to realize these guys are very wealthy. They're not used to living in like basically little I looked at how old some of the dorms are at St. Vincent. They're very old. I think they renovated one of them in like 2005 or something like that. But, you see it in the background of Cam's podcast when he's at camp. It looks like a little prison, cinder block room that he's in. And so I can understand them disliking that part of it. Joe, I think there was some interesting reactions to Mr. Steeler, Cam Hayward, kind of dogging St. Vincent. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're not going to like it. I think That's kind of the whole point. You're not supposed to be staying in, not even luxury. You're not even supposed to be staying in, a nicer accommodation. Like that's where I think you can build some of that camaraderie. Like it's kind of like, hey, this sucks for all of us. We're all in the dirt right now. And that's where you kind of build up and you just spend more time together. You do whatever and build that camaraderie and build that chemistry. I mean, Aaron Rodgers said last year you would miss the Trobe after they left training camp. He's like, I'm gonna miss this place. He talked last year about how great it was for team bonding. I mean, you got Todd Haley say just how well that going away for camp in general just builds chemistry and how just it works because you get a team that's going to be more of a tight knit unit. But yeah, I mean, I understand if you're a player, it sucks. You're going to live in a cramped dorm, you have a roommate, and for a month you're largely away from your family, away from, your friends who aren't on the team, and you're living in like in a bad college dorm. Like not even, some of them like go to High Point, you're living in a mansion. But you're living in a crappy college dorm when you're used to sleeping on silk sheets every night. So yeah, it's not ideal. If I was on the Steelers, I'd probably hate it too. But you build the camaraderie, and I think Cam said this. I mean, he said the same stuff, and whether he's truly just blowing smoke, but about how it really does build camaraderie and how it makes a team closer, a tighter unit. So I think that's how it should be. But yeah, I completely understand the perspective that it's just not great.
Yeah, the camaraderie aspect of it all, I think it's the one thing that bonds the current Steelers to any Steeler dating back to, what was it, like 1966 or something when they started doing camp there. The late 60s is when they started doing camp in at St. Vincent. So, I mean, literally any player now could talk to any player from the 70s, Mel Blunt, whoever, and they could have similar experiences about training camp in the heat of summer in Latrobe, PA. And I think that is a special thing. I don't think it should change. I even look at, there was a story a few weeks ago about Mike Logan, the former safety, and his bond with Troy Polamalu and some of the habits that he watched Polamalu do off the field that weren't even play related that have helped him in his life just in general. And how, I mean, I think he literally credited Polamalu for helping save his life because he had some dark times there. I think Polamalu was like walking the cornfields or something, praying every day for like an hour. And Mike Logan, without telling anybody because he didn't want anybody to know when he was doing it, but he started kind of doing a similar routine there. And so you can pick up on the little off-field things that, kind of help your mind, body, spirit, whatever it is. That stuff matters. It's not just how much you can lift and how fast you can run in football. It matters if the team's working together and they're willing to fight for each other and, all that kind of thing. That stuff absolutely matters. So, yeah, I think it's just some players kind of airing their grievances, which is understandable. And I'm sure, they aren't alone in that. I'm sure everybody dislikes it. Even the college kids coming out these days, the NIL era, I doubt any of them have lived in dorms. So, really, it's for the rookies, even especially the kind of high pedigree rookies. Most of them have probably never been in a dorm a day in their life. So going to be an interesting shock for some of them, I'm sure. But we'll move on. Mike DeFabo of The Athletic kind of named a position that the Steelers could scour the waiver wire for, kind of a position that they need to add depth at. And he said safety, and more specifically free safety. And so I did a little bit of digging about the free safety position in Pittsburgh because, yeah, ever since trading Minkah Fitzpatrick, they haven't really done anything to address free safety. They, of course, brought in Juan Thornhill, and his job was to take away the deep ball. He said it himself. He wasn't very good at that job. So that was the only attempt they really had at replacing the free safety role. Otherwise, they just brought in a bunch of strong safeties and hoped it can work. Last year, obviously, Deshaun Elliott got hurt. They brought in Duggar. They brought in Chuck Clark. It was just a bunch of a bunch of strong safety types trying to fill in the gaps, and obviously it didn't work that well. I looked up the stats of it all. Let me pull that up here. In 2024, the Steelers allowed 47 explosive passing plays. That's passing plays of over 20 yards or more for 3 touchdowns. That was the 10th best mark in the league. Last year, without Minkah Fitzpatrick, They allowed 53 for 12, and that was tied for 22nd in the league. So only, what is that? Only 6 more explosive plays allowed, but 9 more of them were touchdowns. And man, is that backbreaking, just allowing easy touchdowns like that. Steelers have kind of been built on bend, don't break for so long, and a big part of that's having good safety play in the back. Minkah Fitzpatrick may not have been that effective his last couple years in Pittsburgh, but he still was a good lid on the back of the defense. They haven't really done anything to address that, and so could safety be a position that free safety specifically, be a position that they look to add?
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on Darnell Savage too. I think that it's a role he could potentially fill, but I think his path to making the roster is a little bit difficult, and he's going to really have to prove that he's a better player than he's been the past few years during training camp, and I have my doubts about that. So I do believe that that's definitely a possibility there that they go and I mean, every year they're active. I think Omar Khan's added a player that's made the 53-man roster after, July 22nd every year since he's taken over. So for them to go and add somebody that gets caught or waived in the process could potentially kind of be that center fielder that they've been missing makes a lot of sense.
Other positions that they might add to, I think there's what, 1,000. Shoot, I did the math earlier. There's 1,000 some players that get cut on cut down day. Whatever the difference between 90 and 53 is times 32. I did the math earlier. I think it's like 1,180. A lot of players hit the market all at once. And so, are there any other players or positions that Pittsburgh could look to add?
The only one I kind of see is inside linebacker, just because if you think you can get somebody that's maybe a little bit better than Malik Harrison for a little bit cheaper, then I think that's a move you can probably pull the trigger on. But it would be late in the process too, and bringing a guy on late in a room that's already thin, maybe a little bit of a question mark. But that's the only other room I think I could see the Steelers, meaningfully adding at. I think you have pretty good depth everywhere else. I know receiver could be a possibility, but I think they probably have enough in that room, and the receivers that are going to get caught aren't going to be anything that special. Inside linebacker is one I definitely see as being a possibility, but outside of that, I think it's tough to really look at anywhere on the roster and find a position group where they're kind of need to add somewhere.
Yeah, receiver kind of, in my mind, only if Roman Wilson flops, and do they look to add like a does Marcus Valdez Scantling make the Cowboys roster? Could they bring somebody like that back? Somebody who has familiarity with Rodgers. Maybe, but yeah, I agree. Inside linebacker is the obvious choice there. All right, we'll move on to the final topic here. There was an under 25 ranking released from ESPN. And man, do I think that they missed the mark there? I don't necessarily have qualms with where they put the Steelers overall. Maybe it should be a hair better. I think they ended up ranking them, what was it, 28th? Yeah, 28th out of 32 teams in terms of under 25 talent. They were one of only, I think, 4 teams that didn't have a blue chip player listed. And so that was where they missed the biggest, because Nick Herbig, who just got $100 million, is not listed as a blue chip player, and he's only 24 years old. They cut the list off for anybody who turns 25 prior to week 1 of the season. So that eliminates Zach Frazier. I think that eliminates a couple other guys as well. And so, Joe, just your thoughts on that list overall.
Yeah, I just thought it was really dumb. I mean, even you look like Herbig was a huge miss. If you're going to include like somebody like Jonas Savigny on that list, who I thought, largely struggled last season, his second year guard was a second round pick. I don't know how he's a blue chip prospect, but then, your first round rookie offensive tackle at a premium position, Max Honich is not. There's just some guys that were on that list that I was like, huh? That are being considered blue chip, that if you're not going to put a Herbig. That's where I kind of thought it was pretty bad. And honestly, lists like that are dumb. Like Zach Frazier will turn 25 at the end of August, but he's excluded from the list because he turns 25. Guys that are 26, 27, even 28 are still very good players, and the Steelers have a lot of talent, kind of in that area. So I think just the whole exercise itself is pretty stupid, and I think the way it was done and some of the guys that were listed was just bad. Like it just didn't really make a lot of sense.
Darnell Washington, the other one that ages out just before week one. So, you'd expect him to be on there. At least I would if he was under 25. Though they didn't even list him in the graduated section. And they did Troy Fautanu, who wasn't on the list last year because obviously he was coming off that injury. So I guess they don't count Darnell Washington in that category either, which is interesting. But if you look at the list of players who are currently under 25, here are some notables. Drew Aller, Jeremy Bernard, Dalen Everett, Jennings Dunker, Y.A. Blackwell, Howard, Jack Sawyer, and then obviously Darnell Washington, Zach Frazier are just about to turn it. So there are some, a lot of those guys are kind of rookies right now and still have to prove themselves, but there's a lot of potential with that under 25 group still. And then if you extend that by just a year or two, you got Frazier, Fautanu, you get Keanu Benton, Joey Porter Jr., Mason McCormick, Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson, Asante Samuel Jr. It starts to look a lot better. And man, I mean, Bill Barnwell just put out the list of guys who could return first round value, and the Steelers almost led the league, and the entire list of Steelers were guys who are on their rookie contracts or just coming off their rookie contracts. And so that list kind of made it look like, wow, the Steelers youth is so good. This list made it look like, wow, the Steelers youth is really bad. So I just thought that was interesting. I think overall the Steelers are in a good spot with their youth. It might not be the loudest group right now just because, well, the Steelers have one of the oldest starting rosters in terms of like weighted by snap counts. It is an old roster. They didn't really get that much younger in terms of starters this offseason, and they even added some older pieces like Pittman and Jamel Dean, and I'm sure I'm missing one in there. Sebastian Joseph Day will probably, pull that number up a little bit. So I think, the youth is just kind of waiting in the wings, and that's a good spot to be in. Look at what happened in the early 2000s and stuff when guys when Cam Hayward was drafted even. He waited in the wings for a couple years and turned into a several year player, good player for the Steelers. So I have no problem with where the Steelers youth is at right now.
Yeah, totally agree.
All right, well, we'll move into our listener question to wrap up the show. If you want one answered, 412-254-3145. Leave a voicemail, send a text. Just tell us your name, where you're from, and a brief message, and we will answer that on a future episode. If I spoke too fast, that number is also in the show notes wherever you happen to be watching this, or at the bottom of the screen there if you're watching us on YouTube. This one is a text from Dave in Leesburg, Virginia. I believe he wrote in one other time. He says, "Hello again, Depot Dive. I have a question about the phrase, he has little special teams value. Why is it made out to be so difficult of a skill to learn? It seems like players such as Roman Wilson and Caleb Johnson could easily work in the offseason to add value. If Darius Hayward-Bay could do it, why can't anyone?" Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to, what specifically you're looking for in terms of, some guys have, for some areas and special teams, you need to have, particular body type. But I certainly do think both of those guys can work to become more valuable special teams contributors. I mean, you had Caleb Johnson returning kicks to start last season. That's an area I think you could probably tangibly improve if you work on it and you train to do it a little bit more. Roman Wilson, I mean, he has the physicality as a run blocker. I'm sure there's areas he can contribute, but it's just tough for somebody like Roman Wilson. He didn't do that a lot at Michigan. He wasn't really a special teams contributor there. For a guy that doesn't do it in college, so then all of a sudden jump in and be expected to be one in the NFL, and especially now entering, his third season, it's a little bit tougher of an expectation. But there's nothing stopping them from, meaningfully working on, a certain aspect to become more valuable on teams. And I think both guys are going to have to prove that they have some value during training camp. So, maybe it is something they've been working on. But it's just, it's hard to say that a guy has value when he hasn't shown anything in the league yet. I mean, Caleb Johnson obviously had the gaff in week 2 last year that you didn't see a special team snap again after that. But I do think that those guys can maybe become something if they work at it. There's nothing to say they can't. It's just a little bit difficult to project.
Yeah, I think Caleb would probably have an easier time getting involved than Roman. You talked about Darius Hayward-Bay in your question there, Dave. The reason he was able to contribute is because not only does he have the speed like Roman Wilson does, but he's also, 6'2", 210. Roman Wilson's much smaller than that. I think, he kind of looks like still kind of looks like a college player if you see him. He's he's very small. So that's part of the reason you don't want to have him blocking on the return unit. Are you going to put him as a gunner where he could potentially get mugged? I mean, that's, Ben Skoronek's kind of a bigger guy, and I think you like slightly bigger guys for a reason on those, gunner kind of roles. So where do you find value for Roman Wilson with his body type? I mean, body type's a big part of it, and that's why I think Caleb Johnson could potentially get involved. I don't know if you necessarily want him returning kicks. I personally would at least try, just because you kind of want him to get that monkey off his back, if you will. Give him that opportunity to just get that one, put that one to rest, if you will. But, he could provide value as a blocker on, the kick return unit, or, maybe he could run down punts, not as a gunner, but maybe, on the end of the line of scrimmage kind of thing. I think he has a much better chance of adding value in that area, but still not a huge history of it, and there's guys behind him who do have a history of it and probably are better at it than him. So I think it's still the conversation remains about kind of both of those guys. If they don't find themselves with a job in, the primary offense, then yikes, could get tight for both of them. There's a reason I left both off of my initial 53-man roster prediction. I think that wraps up the show, unless you have anything to add, Joe.
Nope.
All right, well, feel free to please do text us and call us in questions, 412-254-3145. This time next week, camp will be underway. I'm sure you guys will have plenty of questions. We appreciate you for tuning in. Man, are we going to be busy starting next Tuesday, and really for a whole month outside of that. There's going to be, we're less than a month away from the first preseason game. We're going to have roster predictions. We're going to have so many different things to talk about at training camp, and the season will be here before we know it. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'm Ross, that's Joe, and we will catch you guys next time.